Hello everyone, it's Jen Kramer. This week we are going to talk about absolute positioning, and next week we'll be talking about relative positioning. This is in response to a question that somebody had, and I thought I'd make a few videos about it. We are going to use the same exact HTML and starting CSS for both weeks, so you'll see this example work through with this week in absolute positioning, next week in relative positioning. So to start with, let me tell you what we're going to be building today. We're going to take these series of cards, those little square colored boxes. We're going to arrange them from the upper left-hand corner of the page, and we're going to fan them out as a series of cards in numeric order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is red, orange, yellow, green, and blue. So that is what we're going to create today and of course next week as we talk about relative positioning. Our starting HTML, only using div tags because there's no semantic markup here whatsoever. There's nothing to communicate with the markup. So we're going to start with a div surrounding the whole entire example. This is the div with a class of container. It has this yellow border here on the page. Then for each one of the cards itself, we have a placeholder around it. That is just a purple border. It's 2 pixels wide. Notice that it looks like these borders here in the middle are somewhat fatter than the ones on the outside. That's because the outside border is in fact 2 pixels. So are the two here, but it's a border of 2 pixels and a border of 2 pixels. They both meet, and that makes it look a little bit fatter there, like 4 pixels or so. Inside of that, we have a card, and that card has a class of card and an ID that's specific to each one of these cards individually. And that's pretty much our HTML. So the purpose of the placeholder is to show you where the card starts and where it's not when we finish. Because of course, we're going to move these cards around on the page. Now let's take a quick peek at the CSS. You'll notice here that we're working with the border box model. If you're not familiar with that, ask me. I could make a whole video talking about content box versus border box. But briefly, the border box model, when you're working with the width property in CSS, border box says that that width property includes the width of the padding, the border, and the content itself. So that's what that's there for. In declaration number 1, we declare that we're going to work with the border box model. And in declaration number 2, we have to tell it to cascade to all of the elements on the page because it doesn't normally inherit. So here we're telling it to apply to all the elements and everything before and after it. It's going to have that same border box sizing. After that, we go into pretty standard sort of styling here, but to point out a few things that are important to us, notice that we've turned off the padding and the margin on the body tag. Some browsers have padding, some browsers have margin. It's that little white frame that sometimes you see on your web pages. This is where that comes from. By putting in the zeros here, we get rid of that on the page. You'll see then we have our container I told you about, the placeholder I told you about, and then we have our series of cards. So the class of card has got the width of 100, the height of 100, and then the IDs have the individual colors for the cards. Right now, these boxes have a position of static. So if we start off with that, position static. We do absolutely nothing. That is because position of static is what every HTML element has as its position property by default. In other words, it's not set, it's just static. So in other words, everything is just going to display one thing after the other on the page. This assumes that you don't have flexbox, grid, CSS columns, floats, or anything else that moves stuff around on the page, any of that turned on. So that is what position static means. So if I change the value here from static to absolute, all of a sudden the page changes radically. So what happened? All I did was say position of absolute. Well, this is the first thing you should know about absolute positioning. Absolute positioning takes an element, whatever it is, in this case it's the card, pulls it out of the so-called normal flow where things are just sort of chunking on down the web page, pulls it out of that normal flow, places it somewhere else on the page, and collapses all of the space that it previously occupied. So this purple square that you see here That is actually all of those purple borders from the placeholder. They just collapsed on top of each other into that square that you see here on the page. These cards are somewhat fanned here at the top. That's only because of the borders associated with this. If the borders weren't here, we would see these cards, we'd only see the green card, card number 4, everything would be aligned exactly in back of it. These are aligning in the upper left-hand corner of the page because we have no other element on this web page that has a position value of anything other than static. I'm going to talk more about that next week, but for right now, just know that absolute positioning needs to position itself in the upper left-hand corner of the web page where the body tag is, unless we're using other types of positioning on our web page. And I'll cover that more as we talk about relative positioning next week. Then the next thing that we want to do then is to make our fan. So now that we've got all the cards in the corner, we want to fan them out in order. So to do that, we are going to make use of 2 properties, left, 0 pixels, and top, 0 pixels. And you'll be shocked to know that there is also a bottom and a right property. Now, top, left, bottom, and right as properties only take effect if you are working with positioning and the value of position is something other than static. So the value of position must be absolute, relative, sticky, or fixed in order for left, right, top, or bottom to do anything at all. But as you see here, our red card has been pulled to the upper corner of that web page. There's no yellow around it. It is smack tight in the corner of that web page. And we are going to take that same concept and we're going to apply it here to say card number 2, we're going to work in pixels. We'll work by tens to try to keep our math easy. This will be important for next week. And so here, that's the orange card. You can see that we are staggered a little bit evenly away from the top and the side here on our design. And we'll keep going like this for card number 3. So this will be 20 and 20. Card number 4 will be 30 and 30. And card number 5 will be 40 and 40. Okay, so as you see here, now I have my 5 cards here on the page, and you can see that they are in fact staggered. There's red, orange, there's the tiny corner for yellow peeking out there, and then green and blue. But these are not in the right order. We want to see those numbers, and we'd like these to be arranged also in the z-axis, in depth, in and out of your monitor. The reason that they're not that way right now is because our HTML is lined up this way. So 3 is at the very back, followed by 1, 5, 2, and 4 is on top. And so that is why these cards are in this order. And you see 3 all the way in the back and 4 all the way on top. So we need to change this. And you are probably already familiar with the z-index property. This is another one that will work with position, only with position of absolute, relative, sticky, or fixed. It will not do anything with a position of static, okay? And z-index works under some other conditions as well. It works with grid, for example, and a couple of other different conditions. But it doesn't just generally work, all right? So be aware of that. Z-index can be a little tricky. So you can make the number for z-index be whatever you want. I have mine currently set up to just the number 1, and then I'm going to set this to just the number 2. But we could have easily used 10 and 20 and 30 and so forth. Actually, I've got that wrong. Let me start with 1 for card number 1, 2 for card number 2, and 3 for card number 3. And that will start to put these in order on the page. So the lower number means it's in the back, the higher number means it's in the front, and anything without the z-index set winds up being behind everything else. So you see right now green and blue are behind everything because they don't have a z-index set just yet. So we can keep going here and assign our z-index of 4 and our Z index of 5, just like that. And now we have these cards staggered very nicely from the upper left-hand corner of the page. So you get a sense here of absolute positioning, removed from the normal flow. The space it occupied previously collapses entirely, and then we can place it anywhere we want on the page using left, right, top, and bottom. And we can move it in and out of our monitor, up and down on the Z-axis, using the Z-index property. So that's what I want you to take away about absolute positioning this week. Stay tuned for next week when I'll be talking about relative positioning. Once again, the links to this CodePen and the starting and the finished states are in the links in the description below, along with some links for our 30 days of HTML and 15 days of CSS email courses, which you can get absolutely free. I'm Jen Kramer. See you next time.